Have you ever met someone at the exact moment your life was falling apart, only to realize they were the very person meant to help you rebuild it? This is a story about a single father who was just trying to get through another quiet, hard day in the woods until he found a bride in a wheelchair, abandoned by the side of a snowy road. He thought she was broken, but what he didn't know was that she was testing the world, trying to find someone who would love her for her heart, not her wealth, not her name. What unfolded next changed all three of their lives forever. So if you're someone who believes in second chances, quiet acts of kindness, and the kind of love that chooses truth over perfection, you'll want to stay with this story until the very end. But before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt stories that warm your soul and remind you of the goodness still left in the world, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free, and it helps us keep sharing stories just like this one. All right, now let's begin. A struggling single dad found a bride in a wheelchair by the woods. She changed his life forever. The woods had a way of swallowing sound. Even the crunch of gravel under Ben Harper's boots was muffled by the thick blanket of pine needles and fallen leaves. It was late afternoon in early October, the golden light slanting through the trees like a cathedral of fire. Ben adjusted the collar of his worn flannel shirt as a chill snuck in with the breeze. His old pickup groaned behind him, half loaded with cut firewood he and Lily would need once the first frost set in. He wasn't expecting to see anyone out here, certainly not a woman, especially not one in a wedding dress. She sat at the edge of a narrow logging road, hunched slightly in a wheelchair with one wheel skewed awkwardly against a rock. Her face was pale, almost translucent, as if the cold had siphoned all the color from her skin. Blonde curls framed her face in disarray, and her eyes, when they slowly lifted to meet his, were wide with something between fear and disbelief. Ben stopped in his tracks, blinking. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but this was not something a man saw every day. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, taking a few steps closer. "Are you all right?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, then nodded weakly. I think so." He crouched down to her level, taking in the torn lace along the hem of her gown, the dirt on her sleeves, and the redness on her knuckles, as though she had tried to push herself through the woods for miles. Something in her eyes told him she wasn't all right at all, but she wasn't the kind of woman who admitted that easily. Ben glanced around. No car, no suitcase, just a woman in white, abandoned at the edge of nowhere. "Do you need help getting somewhere?" Her voice was small. My wheelchair broke. The wheel came off back there. I tried to keep going." "Where were you headed?" he asked. She paused for a beat too long. "Anywhere but back." Ben's brows furrowed, but he didn't press. "Well, you're in luck. I'm headed somewhere, and it's warm." He stood and extended a calloused hand. "Name's Ben. I've got a truck. It's not much, but it'll get you off this road." Her hand trembled as she reached out. "Charlotte." He gently lifted her, mindful of the fragility her body seemed to suggest. She winced slightly, and he instinctively slowed. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," she whispered. The passenger door creaked open as he set her inside, adjusting the seatbelt and tucking an old wool blanket over her knees. The interior smelled faintly of sawdust, pine, and motor oil, comforting in a rugged kind of way. "Do you live far?" she asked as he climbed into the driver's seat. "About 20 minutes down the ridge," Ben replied. "Small house, nothing fancy, just me and my little girl." Charlotte's gaze flicked toward him. "You have a daughter?" "Lily, she's 9. Smarter than me, that's for sure. Likes to draw horses and ask impossible questions." A flicker of something passed through Charlotte's expression, perhaps envy, perhaps grief, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The drive was mostly silent, save for the soft rumble of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Charlotte stared out the window as if trying to memorize the curves of the land. Ben glanced at her from time to time, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the blanket as though letting go would mean crumbling. "You don't have to tell me what happened," he said gently. "Not tonight." Her lips parted, then closed again. She nodded, grateful. They pulled into a gravel driveway that wound its way to a modest cabin nestled among tall firs. A wooden porch stretched across the front, where Lily's red boots were neatly placed beside a carved bench. Smoke curled from the chimney. Ben parked, got out, and opened her door. "We'll get you settled, then I'll figure out what to do about that wheel." Inside, the house was small but warm. A stone fireplace flickered with a lazy fire. The air smelled of cinnamon and cedar. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the rug, coloring. She looked up, her hazel eyes widening as she took in Charlotte, still in the tattered wedding dress, wrapped in a blanket, eyes soft and unsure. "Daddy, is she a fairy?" she asked in a whisper. Ben chuckled. "No, sweetheart. This is Miss Charlotte. She'll be staying with us for a little while." Lily stood and approached, unabashed in her curiosity. "You're really pretty." Charlotte blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Lily reached out and gently touched a bit of Charlotte's dress. "You look like someone who needs hot chocolate." Charlotte smiled for the first time. "That sounds perfect. Shamaram." Ben watched them both for a long second before disappearing into the kitchen. As he poured water into the kettle, he thought about how strange life could be. One moment, he was chopping wood. The next, he was bringing home a stranger in a wedding gown who had clearly been through something too heavy for words. But then again, hadn't he always believed that kindness didn't need an explanation? From the living room, he heard the sound of soft laughter. Charlotte and Lily, already talking like old friends. And somehow he knew that this unexpected meeting was only the beginning of something much bigger than any of them could imagine. Ben hadn't had a guest in over 3 years, unless you counted Hank, the UPS driver who sometimes lingered for coffee when the snow got too thick to drive in. Hosting wasn't part of his life anymore. The rhythm of his days revolved around Lily's school schedule, meals made from scratch, evening chores, and the quiet hum of his woodworking shed behind the house. That rhythm had kept him grounded since losing his wife, and though lonely, it was familiar. Safe. Now with Charlotte in a torn wedding dress sitting by the fire, her delicate hands cradling a chipped ceramic mug, that rhythm had been split in half like an old log under his axe. Lily was curled up beside her on the couch, peppering her with questions between sips of hot chocolate. "Do you really not feel your legs at all?" she asked, curious, not cruel. Charlotte stiffened, then smiled gently. "No, sweetie, not right now." Ben, seated in the corner, repairing a broken drawer with a screwdriver, watched Charlotte out of the corner of his eye. He could see something in her body language, how carefully she chose her words, how she masked emotion behind a polished smile. This wasn't a woman who was used to needing help, and yet here she was, in his house, accepting it because she had no other choice. When Lily finally excused herself to wash up for bed, Charlotte leaned back and exhaled. "Your daughter is remarkable." "She's my whole world," Ben said. "Lost her mom when she was 6. Cancer. Lily never cried in front of me, not once. But I'd find her drawings. Every picture had a sad son." Charlotte looked down into her mug. "She's warm, open. That's rare." Ben set down his tools and stretched his back. "We try to keep things honest around here. Even the hard stuff." Charlotte looked up. Her eyes met his for the first time since they had entered the cabin. "You didn't ask me what happened. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. That's rare, too." There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that lets people breathe a little deeper, like the quiet just after a snowstorm. Ben stood in motion toward the hallway. "There's only one bedroom. It's small, but it's warm. I'll take the couch." Charlotte opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "No arguments. You've been through enough already. Besides, this couch and I go way back. We'll get along fine." He wheeled her down the narrow hall, his large frame barely fitting between the walls. He paused at the doorway. "There's a dresser, fresh sheets, and a nightlight Lily insisted we keep. She says even grown-ups need a little light sometimes." She smiled, this one more genuine than the last. "She's right." He helped her transfer from the wheelchair to the bed, his hands careful, almost reverent. As he pulled the blanket over her legs, she looked up at him. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben hesitated. "Because someone once told me that the hardest times are when kindness matters the most. And I've had my hard times." Charlotte studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the roughness of his hands, the quiet steadiness in his voice. There was no pity in him, only decency. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and left the room. quietly closing the door behind him. Later that night, Charlotte lay awake, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling. The room was simple. One frame photo of Lily and Ben beside a Christmas tree, a handmade quilt with mismatched patches, and the faint scent of pine that lingered in the air. It was the kind of room no designer could ever replicate, because it wasn't decorated, it was lived in. Loved in. She reached under the blanket and flexed her legs. They moved easily. No pain, no paralysis. She wasn't proud of the lie. But when you'd lived most of your life surrounded by people who smiled at your money, not your soul, sometimes you had to go to extremes to learn the truth. Grady had failed that test spectacularly. He'd walked away the moment she'd told him she'd lost everything. And when she refused to undo the lie, he'd left her stranded at a gas station miles from town with nothing but her chair and a bitter wind. She hadn't cried then, but now staring at the nightlight in the corner and listening to the quiet creak of the floorboards under Ben's steps outside her door, she felt something strange. Not grief, not even guilt. It was safety. And that, she realized, was far more dangerous than any lie. Meanwhile, in the living room, Ben sat on the couch, legs stretched out, a blanket pulled to his chest. He couldn't sleep, not because the couch was uncomfortable. He'd napped there through football seasons and flu seasons just fine, but because something had shifted in the air. Charlotte wasn't just a stranger. She was different. Not because of the wheelchair, not because of the dress, because even in her silence, she carried weight, a presence, like someone who had seen the world at its brightest and dimmest and didn't know where she fit anymore. He had no idea who she really was, but somehow that didn't matter. Ben looked at the embers in the fireplace and whispered to no one, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but if this is your way of bringing light back into this house, I won't question it." The fire cracked softly, and somewhere down the hallway, a woman who was not as broken as she seemed finally fell asleep, with a single tear sliding down her cheek and a fragile seed of hope planted in her heart. Morning sunlight crept through the linen curtains, casting long golden stripes across the wooden floor. Charlotte stirred in the small bed, momentarily disoriented. The smell of coffee and bacon wafted down the hallway, drawing her senses gently back to reality. For a few seconds, she forgot everything. The lie, the wheelchair, the cold edge of betrayal. Then it returned, sharp and immediate. The memory of Grady's cold eyes as he shoved her suitcase into the truck and drove off, leaving her behind like old luggage. Her fingers clenched around the blanket. She inhaled deeply, willing the ache back down. She sat up slowly, even though she didn't need to pretend yet. She'd always been a good actress. Years of society galas and charity events had taught her how to smile through discomfort, to walk beside people who only saw her last name and not her soul. But this was different. The lie wasn't to impress anyone. It was to survive something deeper, her growing suspicion that she'd never been truly loved. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Charlotte?" Lily's small voice filtered through. "Can I come in?" Charlotte blinked, surprised. "Of course, sweetheart." The door creaked open, and Lily peeked inside holding a tray with 2 mismatched mugs and a plate of scrambled eggs. She wore flannel pajamas covered in horses, her wild curls escaping their braid. "Daddy said you might like breakfast in bed since your legs are tired." She stepped forward, carefully balancing the tray. "I helped. I made the toast." Charlotte's throat tightened. "That's so thoughtful." "Thank you, Lily." Lily set the tray on the nightstand and plopped down at the edge of the bed, eyes curious. "Do you miss your house?" Charlotte hesitated. "I'm not sure," she said truthfully. "Sometimes I think I was living in a place that didn't feel like home." "Like a hotel?" "Exactly like that." Lily nodded sagely. "Hotels are cool for one night, but then they're just lonely." Charlotte smiled despite herself. "You're wise beyond your years." Lily shrugged. "Daddy says I got my mama's heart." The words hit Charlotte in the chest with surprising force. She looked at the little girl sitting beside her, smiling with quiet pride. There was so much warmth in this child's world, even after all she'd lost. That kind of light didn't come from nowhere. It came from being loved well. "I think your mama must have been a very special person," Charlotte said softly. "She was." Lily's eyes dimmed a little, but the sadness was gentle, not raw. "But I think you're special too. You talk different from people around here, like in books. Charlotte laughed lightly. That's probably true. There was a pause before Lily asked, Do you think you'll ever walk again? Charlotte felt her stomach drop. She looked down at the blanket covering her legs, then back at Lily. I hope so, she said. And strangely, it wasn't a lie. Lily leaned over and whispered, If you try really hard, maybe you will. Daddy says we can do hard things when we're not alone. Charlotte stared at her for a moment, emotions knotting in her throat. He's a good man, your dad. Yeah, Lily agreed easily. But he doesn't laugh much anymore. I noticed. Lily studied her face carefully. Maybe you can make him laugh. Later that morning, Ben returned from the woods, sleeves rolled up, sawdust clinging to his jeans. He carried in a box of tools and a spare wheel he'd scavenged from a neighbor's old lawnmower. I think I can rig something up for your chair, he said as he kneeled beside it on the porch. Charlotte sat nearby, wrapped in a shawl Lily had insisted she wear. You don't have to go to all this trouble. Ben looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. You're under my roof. That makes you my responsibility for now. Charlotte tilted her head. You always this hospitable with strangers in distress? Only the ones wearing wedding dresses in the middle of the forest. She laughed, a real laugh, and Ben looked up again, startled by the sound. It had been a long time since he'd heard that kind of laughter echo off his porch. You should laugh more often, he said quietly. So should you. Their eyes locked for a brief second too long. Then he looked away, adjusting a bolt. I'm not very good at that. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to let yourself. The moment hung between them, thick with something unnamed. Ben cleared his throat. Well, this should hold. Might not be pretty, but it'll roll. Charlotte reached down and touched the chair's armrest. That's more than I had yesterday. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the fire in the hearth crackled, Charlotte lay awake once again. The house was quiet. She could hear the muffled rhythm of Ben's footsteps as he checked the windows and locked the doors. Routine, dependability, protection. And she was lying. Every moment she let Ben believe she was paralyzed was another stitch in the fabric of a deception she hadn't planned to stretch this far. But how could she explain the truth now? That she'd orchestrated a test to expose the insincerity of her own world, only to end up here, in a place where someone's kindness didn't need a reason. She rose slowly and stood by the window, parting the curtain. The moonlight made the snow-dusted pines shimmer like silver. Her legs held her steady, hidden behind the veil of night and secrecy. Charlotte whispered into the darkness, What am I doing? The answer didn't come. But somewhere deep in her chest, a new question surfaced, one that frightened her even more. What if this was the place she was supposed to find all along? Rain came softly in the early hours, a quiet drumming on the tin roof that brought with it the unmistakable scent of pine and wet earth. Charlotte sat by the window, wrapped in the same shawl Lily had given her, watching droplets slide lazily down the glass. She hadn't slept much. The lie sat heavier now, not just because it was growing harder to maintain, but because the people she was deceiving didn't deserve it, especially Lily. The girl had a way of disarming even Charlotte's most rehearsed defenses. Her words were honest, never sharp, her heart wide open. It wasn't just that Lily was sweet. She was wise in that rare way only children touched by loss can be. She understood sadness, but refused to let it win. Charlotte admired that more than she could say. Footsteps padded down the hallway, followed by a soft knock. Come in, Charlotte called. Lily peeked through the door, holding something behind her back. Her cheeks were rosy, her hair wild with sleep. I made you something, Charlotte smiled. Is that so? Lily walked in, producing a folded sheet of paper with crayon markings. She handed it over solemnly, like it was something sacred. Charlotte unfolded the paper carefully. It was a drawing of the three of them standing outside the cabin. Charlotte in her wheelchair, Ben with a hammer in hand, and Lily in her favorite horse pajamas. Above them, a sun with a smiling face beamed down. The words at the top were spelled in childish scrawl. This is our house now. Charlotte blinked. The simplicity of it was devastating. Do you like it? Lily asked, eyes wide. Charlotte looked at her. I love it, sweetheart. Truly. No one's ever drawn me into their family before. Lily tilted her head. That's 'cause you haven't been in one yet. But now you are. Charlotte bit her lip, holding back the emotion rising in her chest. She opened her arms. Come here. Lily climbed onto the bed and curled against her, small and warm. Daddy says we should always make room for people who are hurting. Charlotte closed her eyes. What would you say, Ben, she thought, if you knew you were making room for someone who wasn't telling you the whole truth? Later that morning, Ben was fixing a loose board on the porch when Charlotte wheeled herself outside. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glistening under a soft gray sky. Birds were chirping in the trees again, and somewhere a squirrel was rustling in the underbrush. You're up early, he said, glancing over his shoulder. I couldn't sleep. Ben nodded, then tapped the board into place with one final knock. I've been meaning to fix this for weeks. Lily keeps tripping over it. Do you always do everything yourself? Charlotte asked, adjusting her shawl. Ben sat back on his heels and rubbed his hands together. Always have. Don't see much point in waiting around for help that never comes. That's a hard way to live. It's safer than being disappointed. She studied him, the firm set of his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes. You don't trust easily. I trust my gut, he said, and my daughter. Everything else I take slow. Charlotte looked out at the trees. That drawing she gave me, it broke something open. Ben's head turned. What do you mean? I think she sees something I don't even see in myself. She paused, and I'm terrified of disappointing her. You won't, he said firmly. You don't know that. I know she doesn't let just anyone in, and she did with you. He stood, brushed off his jeans, and looked at her with quiet conviction. That counts for something. Charlotte looked away, tears threatening again. Ben, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you stop laughing? The question hung in the air like a held breath. He sighed. After my wife passed, I felt like if I laughed, it'd be disrespecting her memory, like moving forward meant leaving her behind. That's not how it works, Charlotte said softly. I know that now, but back then, it was the only way I knew how to survive. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. You didn't leave her behind. You carried her with you. I can see it in the way you raise Lily. Ben swallowed, his eyes glistening. That girl keeps me going. She sees your heart, even when you can't. They stood in silence for a moment, the stillness between them no longer awkward but companionable, like two people slowly discovering they weren't as alone as they'd thought. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Charlotte found herself lingering in the living room. Ben was oiling a hand-carved wooden box he'd made for Lily's art supplies. The fire cast a warm glow across the room, turning the walls into a canvas of dancing light. You made that? She asked, wheeling closer. Yeah, just finished it this week. It's beautiful. He looked up. Want to try? Charlotte blinked. Me? He gestured toward the workbench by the window. We've got scraps. I can show you the basics. Her hands trembled slightly as she joined him. Ben handed her a small piece of cedar and a carving knife, guiding her fingers. The scent of the wood was rich and comforting. Start with something simple, he said. Your name, maybe. She traced a soft line, then looked up at him. Do you ever get scared it'll break? He paused. Sometimes. But then I remember, every scar in the wood tells a story, makes it more beautiful, not less. Charlotte smiled, more to herself than to him. I think I needed to hear that. Ben watched her for a long moment, then said, So did I. That night, alone in the bedroom, Charlotte placed the crayon drawing Lily had given her on the nightstand. Beside it, she laid the cedar scrap she'd carved, just a simple word in shaky lines. Hope. She stared at it for a long while, her fingers brushing the edges. Tomorrow, she thought, maybe I'll tell him the truth, but not tonight. Tonight she would sleep in this house of kindness, surrounded by the fragile miracle of a child's trust, and the growing certainty that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't the only one learning how to walk again. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a warm apology after days of gray. In the backyard, golden light spilled over the trees, glinting off dew-laced branches. Ben was already in his workshop, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands moving steadily over a curved piece of walnut. The rhythmic rasp of the hand plane echoed through the open window. Inside the cabin, Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She'd been watching him from a distance all morning, his quiet precision, the way he wiped the blade after each pass. The way he stood with the quiet confidence of a man who'd been broken and rebuilt himself from splinters. Lily was at school for the morning, and the house felt hushed without her. A part of Charlotte missed the little girl's questions, her chatter, her laughter echoing through the rooms. But she also welcomed the silence. It gave her space to think. She ran her fingertips along the edge of the wooden coaster Ben had made. The grain was rough, imperfect, real. There was no polish for show, just honest workmanship and function. Like Ben himself. After a moment, she wheeled out to the back porch and called gently, "Mind if I join you?" Ben looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. Not at all. She rolled closer, positioning herself near the open doorway of the workshop. The scent of sawdust and cedar enveloped her like a familiar coat. "You're always building something," she said, nodding toward the half-formed rocking chair. He grinned slightly. "Gives my hands something to do while my mind catches up." Charlotte tilted her head. "What's this one for?" "Neighbor down the road. Just had their first grandchild. Asked if I could make something for the nursery." "Do you sell these?" "Sometimes. Mostly trade. Folks around here don't have much cash, but they've got eggs, wool, and stories." She chuckled. "That's a different kind of economy. Better one, if you ask me." He moved aside and motioned toward a smaller table. "Want to try something again? Got some soft pine set up. Easier to work with." Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." He guided her through carving simple curves, showing her how to angle the blade just right. She wasn't naturally steady, but she was patient, deliberate. With each pass, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, quiet admiration. At one point, her hand slipped slightly, and the blade nicked the wood. "I messed it up," she sighed. Ben shook his head. "No such thing. That mark? It's yours now. Makes it real." She looked at him. "Do you believe that? Even about people?" He met her gaze. "Especially about people." Charlotte looked down at the line she'd carved. It was imperfect, but it was hers. "I think I've spent most of my life trying to be polished, presentable, untouched." Ben set down his tool. "Why?" "Because the world I grew up in only values what looks good on paper. Degrees, net worth, name recognition, a perfect image. But here," she trailed off, eyes sweeping across the sawdust-covered floor, the shelves of uneven bowls, the wood shavings scattered like fallen petals. "Here, the flaws are part of the beauty." Ben's voice was quiet. "You don't have to pretend to be anyone in this place, Charlotte." She swallowed hard. "You keep saying things like that, and I'll start believing them." His smile was soft, a touch sad. "Maybe you should." They worked side by side for another hour, her lines becoming steadier, his glances more frequent. There was something blooming between them, fragile but real, like wildflowers cracking through stone. After lunch, Ben cleaned up the tools while Charlotte returned to the porch. She stared at the mountain ridge in the distance, lost in thought. When he joined her with 2 mugs of fresh coffee, she broke the silence. "I wasn't supposed to end up here." Ben sipped his coffee. "Funny how the best things happen when plans fall apart." "I was engaged," she said suddenly. Ben's hand paused mid-air, but he didn't look surprised. "I figured there was someone." "There was," she said, "and he was everything my parents ever wanted. Tall, polished, Ivy League. But I never knew if he saw me or just my last name." Ben nodded slowly. "What happened?" "I told him I was broke, that my trust was gone, that I'd been in an accident and couldn't walk. I needed to know if he'd stay." Ben looked at her now, his eyes unreadable. "And he didn't." Charlotte let out a bitter laugh. "He left me at a gas station with nothing but my chair and a suitcase. Said he couldn't handle a future built on charity and compromise." Ben was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That man was a fool." Charlotte blinked. "You're not even surprised I lied to him?" "I didn't say that," Ben replied. "I think you were scared. You wanted to know who would love you for you. We all want that." He turned toward her, voice steady. "But here's the thing about tests like that. They tend to test you too." She met his gaze, heart pounding. "I've known you less than a week," he continued, "but you've already changed the way my little girl smiles. And if what you're carrying is guilt, I'd trade that for truth any day." Charlotte looked down, her voice barely audible. I haven't told you everything either. Ben didn't flinch. I didn't expect you to. She looked up at him, eyes wet. I want to. And though the words weren't said aloud, something passed between them. A door opening. A breath shared. He reached across and placed his hand over hers. When you're ready, I'll be here. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the cedar carving she'd worked on earlier resting on the nightstand. She traced the letters with her fingertip. Hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and inside, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was pretending. She felt like someone worth staying for. It was the kind of crisp October afternoon that made the mountains blush. The golden aspens shimmered like coins under the sun, and the air carried the scent of dried leaves, wood smoke, and something sweeter. Possibility. Charlotte had spent the morning reading on the porch while Ben and Lily raked piles of leaves near the back fence, laughing as the little girl dove into them with reckless joy. For days now, Charlotte had felt the lie pressing more tightly around her, like a sweater that no longer fit. Every kindness from Ben, every hug from Lily, only made the weight of it heavier. The guilt clung to her skin even as the warmth of this place threatened to crack her open. By early afternoon, the quiet pulled her out of the cabin. She wheeled herself to the path behind the workshop, where Ben had flattened the terrain so she could get closer to the trees. It was the first time she had ventured this far on her own. But she wasn't in the chair. She'd waited until she was alone, closed the cabin door, stood, walked slowly, unsteadily, one foot after the other, testing the strength in her legs like a child learning to trust gravity. Her body was fine. Her balance wavered only from disuse. The chair had become a symbol now, not a necessity. She didn't know what she was doing, not exactly. But the need to breathe in truth, if only for a moment, had pushed her here. She reached the clearing and stood beneath a tall birch tree, its bark pale and flaking, like parchment. The breeze moved through the branches above her like a hymn, and she closed her eyes, letting the silence settle deep into her bones. And then a twig snapped behind her. She turned sharply, too sharply, and her foot caught on a root. The fall wasn't hard, but it was awkward. She landed on her side with a soft grunt, her palms scraping against the earth. The ache was minor. The shock wasn't. Before she could sit up, a familiar voice rang out. Charlotte! Ben's footsteps thundered down the trail. Within seconds, he was kneeling beside her, eyes wide, breath caught somewhere between alarm and confusion. Are you okay? He asked, already reaching to help her up. Charlotte froze. Ben's hand hovered over hers. His eyes, so focused a second earlier, narrowed slightly. Your legs, he said slowly. You're standing? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Not yet. Ben helped her sit upright, but didn't lift her fully. He was watching her now, not the way a man watches someone injured, but the way a man watches something fall apart in slow motion. Charlotte took a shaky breath. I was going to tell you. Ben sat back on his heels. Were you? I was. I swear. Her voice broke. I've been trying to find the right moment, and every time I thought I was ready, you weren't, he finished quietly. She nodded, tears brimming. Ben didn't speak for a long moment. The wind moved gently through the trees above them. Finally, he asked, Why? Charlotte wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Because I needed to know who I was without the money, without the family name, without the expectation. And then I needed to know who would stay if I had nothing. Ben's expression didn't change. I told Grady I'd lost my fortune and I couldn't walk, she said, voice trembling. He left me at a gas station with a broken chair and a cold cup of coffee. Just like that. Ben exhaled, slow and steady. I was angry, but more than that, I was terrified. Not of him, of myself, of not knowing who I could trust. And then I came here. She swallowed hard. And everything felt different. And that made it worse. Because this, what you've given me, this isn't a test anymore. This is real. Ben looked at her for what felt like a full minute, not saying anything, just breathing, watching. When he finally stood, his voice was quiet, almost distant. Do you know what trust means to me, Charlotte? She stood too, her body stiff, unsure. It means choosing to believe in someone when the truth is still hiding. Ben, I opened my home to you, he said, not in anger, but in ache. I let you into my daughter's life. I know, and I never meant to hurt you, he nodded. But you did. Charlotte's breath hitched. Ben looked away toward the trees. It wasn't the lie that hurts the most. It's that you didn't think I could handle the truth. A silence stretched between them, thick and sharp. Then quietly Charlotte whispered, I'm sorry. Ben didn't answer right away. When he finally turned back, his expression had softened just a little. Come on, he said. Let's get you back to the house. The walk back was slow. Charlotte didn't ask for the chair. Ben didn't offer. They moved in step, two people caught in the fragile space between what was and what could still be. At the porch, Lily came running. Daddy, Miss Charlotte. She stopped when she saw their faces. Is everything okay? Charlotte knelt and opened her arms. Come here, sweet girl. Lily threw herself into the embrace. Charlotte held her tightly. I have something to tell you soon, okay? Lily pulled back. You're not leaving, are you? Charlotte smiled through tears. Not unless they make me. Lily looked to her father. Daddy? Ben met Charlotte's eyes over their daughter's head. He didn't speak, but he didn't turn away either. And in that fragile silence, Charlotte found the first crack of hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth hadn't ended everything. Maybe it was just the beginning. 2 days passed. Ben was quieter than usual, his movements a touch slower, his words more measured. He didn't treat Charlotte unkindly. He still poured her coffee in the morning and repaired the back porch steps she'd stumbled on. But something in his eyes had changed. The openness was gone, replaced with a distance that neither harshness nor coldness could explain. It was grief. Not the kind that came from death, but the kind that followed disappointment. Charlotte gave him space, but not without heartache. Every time Lily grabbed her hand or leaned against her shoulder, Charlotte felt both joy and dread coil in her chest. How long could she stay? Should she? The truth was out now, but the consequences hadn't settled. Not yet. On the third morning, the quiet was broken by the sound of tires crunching gravel. Ben stepped out of the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. Charlotte came out from the kitchen just in time to see a sleek black SUV roll to a stop at the edge of the driveway. Too shiny, too new for these parts. Then the driver's door opened. Charlotte froze. Grady! He stepped out in his pressed slacks and collared coat like a man who had never dirtied his shoes on a gravel road in his life. His hair was perfect. His expression smug like always. Well, he called out, arms slightly spread. This is quite a setup. Ben's body shifted subtly in front of Charlotte, instinctively. Charlotte, Grady said with mock warmth, I've been looking everywhere for you. She stepped forward, jaw tight. You didn't look that hard. Grady feigned offense. You disappeared, darling. You ran off before we could have a proper conversation. I didn't disappear, she said. You left me on the side of the road and never came back. Grady's smile faltered. You were being unreasonable. You wanted to play out this fantasy of being poor and broken. I gave you space to come to your senses. Ben crossed his arms. This private property. Grady glanced at him for the first time. His gaze traveled over Ben's flannel shirt, worn boots, calloused hands. He didn't hide the sneer. And you must be the local handyman who's been keeping her entertained. Ben didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched. Charlotte stepped between them. Grady, you don't belong here. Grady laughed. I belong wherever you are. You're still my fiancée. Not anymore. Charlotte, he said, voice dropping into a condescending hush. I've spoken with your father. He agrees this has gone too far. You've made your point. Let's go home. You can take off the country costume and we'll forget all about this. Ben's eyes flicked to Charlotte. The pain in them, raw and fresh, wasn't just about Grady's arrogance. It was about realizing just how deeply Charlotte's world still intertwined with this man. Charlotte shook her head. You don't understand. I don't want that life anymore. You don't know what you want, Grady snapped. You've been living with woodcutters and 9-year-olds in cabins like some sort of morality play. This isn't real. Charlotte turned to Ben. It is real. It's the only thing that's felt real in years. Ben didn't respond. Grady smirked. So this is how you punish your father? By shacking up with a widower and his kid in a shack? Before Charlotte could react, Ben stepped forward. calm, controlled. I think it's time for you to leave. Grady raised an eyebrow. And if I don't? Ben didn't answer with words. His stare did the talking. Something primal passed between the two men. Grady, for all his money and polish, backed down. He sniffed, adjusted his cufflinks, and turned to Charlotte. You're making a mistake, he said, quieter now. You think this is noble, but it's just small. Charlotte straightened her shoulders. Then maybe small is exactly what I need. Grady opened the SUV door. When you're ready to come back to reality, call me. I won't. The vehicle pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the mountain road. Silence settled like ash. Charlotte stood, heart pounding, as Ben turned and walked back into the house without a word. Later that evening, she found him on the back porch, sitting alone with a beer in hand, watching the dusk creep in. I didn't know he would come, she said softly. Ben nodded. I believe you. They sat in silence. He doesn't know me, Charlotte continued. He never did. He was in love with a version of me that smiled on red carpets and looked perfect in pearls. Ben didn't look at her. And who are you really? She hesitated. I'm still figuring that out. That's fair. She turned to him. But I know this. I've never felt more myself than I have here. With Lily. With you. Ben's eyes flicked toward her. But you didn't tell me about him. I was ashamed. You think I wouldn't understand shame? She flinched. No. I was afraid you'd see me the way he did. Ben exhaled. I see you, and I won't lie. It hurt. Not because of who you used to be, but because you didn't trust me with who you are now. Charlotte swallowed. I do trust you. I think I trust you more than I trust myself. He looked down at the beer in his hands. That's a start. Then quietly he added, Lily asked if you'd be staying. Charlotte blinked. And what did you say? I said I didn't know. She reached for his hand. Do you want me to? Ben looked at her, finally eyes heavy with weariness and something softer, maybe forgiveness. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I know this much. You didn't come here by accident. Charlotte nodded, her heart aching with hope and fear all at once. No, she whispered, I didn't. The days that followed were unusually quiet. The easy rhythm that once defined the little cabin, Lily's chatter over breakfast, the crackle of wood in the stove, Ben's voice humming low from the workshop, now felt splintered. Something fragile had broken beneath the surface, and Charlotte could feel it with every cautious glance, every silence that used to feel warm, but now stretched a little too long. Ben had not withdrawn, not entirely. He still brought her tea in the morning, still helped Lily with her homework, still fixed the latch on the garden gate. But there was a difference in the way he moved around her, a space he had quietly built between them. She didn't blame him. How could she? She'd come here wrapped in layers of falsehoods, emotional, social, even physical. And while she had meant no harm, the truth was that she had harmed him. Worse, she had harmed the rare thing that had begun to grow between them, trust. Charlotte stood alone on the porch that evening, watching the last streaks of sunset bleed across the sky. Autumn had deepened in the past week. The trees now stood in full riot, reds, oranges, golds, like a fire that refused to be tamed. She heard the screen door open behind her. Ben stepped out, hands in his pockets. He stood beside her without a word, his eyes trained on the horizon. Charlotte took a breath. I meant what I said the other day. I didn't plan for any of this. Not like this. I know, he replied, quiet but steady. I just wanted to disappear, to find out if I had anything left inside me that was real. He looked at her. And did you? She turned to him. I think so, but I'm afraid I ruined it before I figured out what to do with it. Ben's gaze dropped to the porch floor. Charlotte, you have to understand, it wasn't just about the lie. It was about where you came from. That man. That world. She nodded. I know. My whole life, I've tried to keep Lily safe. After her mother died, I promised myself I'd never let anyone near her who couldn't love her completely, who didn't understand how fragile she is, even when she pretends to be strong. Charlotte's voice broke. I would never hurt her. I don't think you meant to. But she loves you, Charlotte. Deeply. And I had to ask myself, What happens if you leave? If one day your real life calls you back, and this place, this life, becomes just a chapter you try to forget? Charlotte blinked back tears. This isn't a chapter to me. It's the first time I've ever felt like I belonged anywhere. Ben was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's not just my trust you need to earn back." "I know," she whispered. "It's hers too." Later that night, Charlotte found Lily in her bedroom, curled under a patchwork quilt with a book open on her lap. She was tracing the illustrations with her fingers, mouthing the words under her breath. "Hey there," Charlotte said softly, sitting at the edge of the bed. Lily looked up. "Is Daddy mad at you?" Charlotte hesitated. "Not mad, just hurt." "Because of the secret?" "Yes." Lily nodded solemnly. "I don't like secrets. They make people look sad, even when they smile." Charlotte reached out and brushed a lock of hair from her face. "You're very smart, you know that?" Lily gave a shy smile. "Are you going to leave?" Charlotte's heart twisted. "Do you want me to?" Lily looked down at the blanket. "Sometimes I think, maybe if you stay, we could be a family." Charlotte's throat tightened. "That's what I want too." "But you lied." "I did, and I'm so sorry." Lily looked up. "Can you fix it?" "I want to try." Lily studied her for a moment, then held out a hand. "Okay, but no more secrets." Charlotte took her hand and kissed it gently. No more secrets. The next day, Charlotte rose early and walked, on her own, down to the workshop where Ben was already working. His back was to her, the rhythmic sound of sanding filling the air. She waited until he noticed her. He paused, wiped his hands, and nodded. "Morning." "I want to show you something," she said. He followed her outside, where she led him to the old tree stump near the back of the garden. Resting on it was a small cedar box, rough around the edges, imperfect. Ben lifted the lid. Inside was a carving she had done. Her name, Lily's name, and his, all intertwined in a circle. In the center, a simple word, trust. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did," she said quietly, "but I'm asking you to believe in who I'm trying to be now." Ben ran a finger across the wood, then looked up at her. "You made this?" "I didn't sleep much." A long silence followed. Then he said, "I never thought I'd meet someone who made me want to risk my peace again." Charlotte swallowed hard. "And now?" Ben looked at her. "I'm not ready to say it's all healed, but I'm not ready to say goodbye either." Charlotte's shoulders eased. Ben added, "One step at a time. No more pretending." She nodded. "One honest step at a time." That evening, they sat on the porch while Lily sketched wildflowers into her notebook. The quiet between them felt different now. Still uncertain, still tender, but no longer filled with silence. It was filled with possibility. Charlotte leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her like a balm. The truth was out. The damage had been done. But there was something stronger than pain stirring beneath the surface now. The slow, careful work of rebuilding. And in that stillness, in the light that lingered even after the sun dipped below the hills, she felt something return. Not just hope, but the kind of love that could survive a storm. The morning light had shifted. It was gentler now, less golden, more silver, like autumn was beginning to pass the torch to early winter. Frost clung to the edges of the window panes, and a hush had settled over the cabin, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Charlotte stood in the kitchen, her hand wrapped around a warm mug of tea, staring at the suitcase on the floor by the door. It looked too clean, too sharp in a place like this. Out of place, like she was again. Ben had left early to deliver a set of handcrafted chairs to a client on the other side of the valley. He hadn't said much when he left, just a simple, "back by dusk," and a long, unreadable glance that lingered just enough to hold meaning. Lily was still asleep, curled up with her favorite plush rabbit and a stack of storybooks by her pillow. Charlotte had kissed her forehead before sunrise, the moment pressing into her heart like a final imprint. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because it was the only way to honor the truth now. The world outside this cabin was still waiting. Questions unanswered, people to face, stories to finish. Her father had called. Grady's appearance had surely made headlines. And somewhere beyond the trees and ridgelines, a city buzzed with expectation. She couldn't run from it forever, but she couldn't just vanish either. Not from Lily, especially not from her. So she wrote a letter. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, the tip of Ben's fountain pen hovering above the page. The fire crackled behind her, but she barely noticed the warmth. Dear Lily, I don't know how to begin this, so I'll just start by saying, I love you. You've changed me in ways you may not understand yet, but one day when you're older, I hope you'll read this and know that you helped someone find her way home. Just by being exactly who you are. You once told me that people who are broken can still be part of something beautiful. That was the night you gave me the drawing of the three of us. I keep it with me. I always will. I wish I could stay longer. I wish I could explain everything. But sometimes grown-ups have to go do things they don't want to, just to make things right. Please don't think this is goodbye forever. This is just me keeping a promise I made to myself. To be better, to be honest, to fix what I broke. Tell your dad I said thank you. For the porch light, the quiet kindness, the firewood, the silence he filled with safety. But most of all, thank you for trusting me with your heart. You'll always have mine. Love, Charlotte. She folded the note carefully, slid it into the envelope, and wrote Lily's name across the front with a trembling hand. Then she placed it on the kitchen table, beside the little cedar carving that read Hope, and set her suitcase quietly by the door. One more glance around the cabin, at the quilt on the couch, the firewood stacked by the hearth, the drawing still pinned to the fridge, and then she slipped outside. The morning was still. Cold. Her boots crunched over the thin layer of frost on the porch steps. The old truck she'd borrowed from a neighbor the day before waited at the edge of the drive, keys already in the ignition. She climbed in, paused, and looked back at the cabin one last time. Then she drove away. Lily woke with the sun warming her blanket. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and shuffled into the kitchen, still half dreaming. She froze when she saw the suitcase was gone. The letter caught her eye. She picked it up with both hands, heart pounding. She read slowly, her lips moving with each word, the way children do when trying to make sense of something too big for their hearts to carry. Then she ran. Ben returned just after sunset. The sky was streaked with rose and gray, the wind picking up speed as he pulled into the drive. His first sign that something had changed was the missing suitcase. The second was Lily, waiting on the porch, letter clutched to her chest, face tear-streaked but determined. She left, Lily said before he could even speak. Ben's heart thudded. When? This morning. Lily held out the letter. She left this for me. He took it with careful hands and read in silence. By the end, his throat was thick with emotion he didn't know how to name. She said she had to make things right, Lily whispered, that she wasn't saying goodbye forever. Ben crouched down and took his daughter's small hands in his. You believe her? Lily nodded. I think she's brave. Ben nodded too, but his heart ached. Charlotte was gone. Again. And even if she meant to come back, there was no way of knowing when or if she would. He looked out at the road, empty and winding. Sometimes, he said softly, the people who need healing the most are the ones who walk away when they start to feel whole, just so they can prove to themselves they can carry it. Lily tilted her head. Will she come back? Ben wrapped an arm around her. I don't know. They stood together as the darkness fell over the mountains, the porch light flickering on automatically, like it always did. Soft, steady, waiting. And in that quiet moment, they didn't say another word. Because sometimes when someone you love leaves for the right reasons, all you can do is leave the light on. 3 weeks passed. The first few days after Charlotte left were the hardest. Lily moved through them like a ghost. Quiet, watchful, her normal chatter replaced by long silences and too many questions Ben couldn't answer. Every knock at the door made her run to the window. Every unfamiliar sound in the woods made Ben's heart leap with foolish hope. But Charlotte didn't return. The nights were colder now. The fireplace burned longer, and Ben started wearing his thick flannel shirts even inside the cabin. Outside, the trees stood bare against the wind, their colors lost to the changing season. It felt fitting. The space Charlotte had left behind was not just physical, it was emotional, palpable, like she had become a part of the cabin itself. Her cedar carving still sat on the mantel. The hope box remained on the shelf near the front door. Ben couldn't bring himself to move either. He told himself he wasn't angry anymore. He told himself he understood. But the truth was, a small piece of him still felt abandoned until the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, just his name, Ben Harper, typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper from a law office in Denver. At first he thought it was a mistake, or worse, some legal complication from Charlotte's world that had somehow tangled itself around him. But then he saw the name on the document, Charlotte Elizabeth Winslow. And beneath that, a simple line. This letter serves as notification that a lien held against your property by First Heritage Bank has been officially satisfied and cleared. The outstanding balance has been paid in full. No further payments are required. Ben read it 3 times before the words sank in. The bank loan, years of scraping together payments, of wondering if the next winter would be the one that forced them out, it was gone. Paid. By her. He stared at the letter for a long time, the paper trembling in his hands. He didn't tell Lily right away. He needed to understand it himself first, needed to walk the perimeter of the land and feel the ground beneath his feet with the knowledge that it was truly his now. She had done this without fanfare, without a note, without a message or a name scribbled in the margin. Just love, silent, selfless, final. Ben stood at the edge of the back pasture that evening, watching the wind move through the tall grass. The mountains in the distance wore their first veil of snow. He could almost hear her voice again, soft, deliberate, filled with the kind of truth people only speak when they're finally free of fear. I'm not asking you to forget what I did, but I'm asking you to believe in who I'm trying to be now. He did believe her, and now more than ever, he wanted to tell her that. He told Lily that night. They sat at the kitchen table after dinner, the dishes still stacked in the sink. He handed her the letter, watched her eyes move across the page slowly. She paid off the house? Lily whispered. Ben nodded. All of it. Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, She really loves us. Ben swallowed the lump in his throat. Yeah, I think she does. Lily looked up. So why hasn't she come back? He didn't know how to answer. She said she had to fix something, he said finally. Maybe this was how she did it. Lily hugged the letter to her chest. I hope she knows we didn't need a big house or money. We just needed her. Ben nodded. Me too. That weekend, Ben took Lily into town for groceries. It was something they did every Saturday. Routine and comforting. But this time, as they stood in line at the small local hardware store, something unexpected happened. The cashier, a woman named Donna, who always wore red lipstick and called everyone Hon, handed Ben his change and said, Oh, Mr. Harper, the bank called here last week asking for you. Something about releasing a title? I figured it was for your truck. Ben raised an eyebrow. It wasn't. Donna grinned. Well, whatever it is, must be good news. You looked lighter today. Different. Ben glanced at Lily, who grinned up at him with her 2 front teeth missing. He smiled softly. Yeah, it's been a good week. On the way home, they passed the small meadow near the edge of their property, the place where Charlotte had taken her first honest fall, the day her secret came undone. Lily asked if they could stop. They walked out into the field. The wind had flattened the grasses, leaving behind soft patches where snow would settle soon. Ben watched his daughter twirl once, her arms wide to the wind. She's not gone forever, Lily said suddenly. Ben raised an eyebrow. How do you know? Because people like her don't walk away from people like us. He smiled. You think so? I know so. And somehow he believed her. That night after Lily had gone to bed, Ben stood at the window, looking out at the road beyond the pines. His breath fogged the glass. He thought of Charlotte's hands, how carefully they had held Lily's, how steady they'd been when she carved her first piece of wood. She hadn't disappeared because she didn't love them. She had left because she did. And now she had given them a gift more lasting than money, security, safety, a foundation. But more than that, she had given them the chance to choose her for who she really was, not for what she gave. And when, if she returned, he would be ready, not with questions, but with arms wide open. The first snow arrived overnight. Ben stepped onto the porch that morning to find the world hushed and blanketed in white. A soft dusting clung to the bare branches, the rooftop, the old wooden railing, even the fence Lily had painted that summer, now a little crooked from weather and time, was rimmed in silver. He stood there with his coffee, watching his breath curl into the cold air, and wondered, not for the first time, where she was. Whether she'd seen the first snow too. Whether she missed the scent of pine or the creak of the floorboards under her feet. Whether she still thought of Lily, of him. She had been gone for 6 weeks. The letter from the bank had come and gone. The carvings she'd made still sat on the mantel, untouched. And though life had resumed its routine, school lunches, firewood chopping, snow shoveling, Charlotte's absence left a quiet ache that lingered like an echo. Ben hadn't said it aloud, not even to himself, but some part of him feared she wouldn't return. Then on a late afternoon in mid-November, the wind changed. It wasn't much. A subtle shift in the way the air moved, the scent it carried. But Ben felt it, deep in his bones. And so, when Lily looked up from her drawing by the fireplace and asked, "Do you think she'll come back before Christmas?" He didn't give his usual non-committal shrug. Instead, he said, "Maybe sooner." It was just before sunset when it happened. Ben was outside stacking wood, the sky glowing in streaks of lavender and rose, when he heard the crunch of tires on snow-packed gravel. He turned toward the road, wiping his hands on his jeans. A white SUV had stopped at the end of the drive. The engine shut off. The driver's door opened, and Charlotte stepped out. No wheelchair, no entourage, no veil of mystery. She wore jeans and boots, her coat dusted with road salt, her blonde hair tied back simply. There were no designer sunglasses, no perfectly pressed lines. Just her, flushed from the cold, nervous and unsure, her eyes searching until they found his. Ben didn't move. Not yet. She took a deep breath, then walked forward, her boots crunching softly over the snow. In her hands she held something, a carved block of wood, smooth and familiar, the same cedar box she had left with the word hope etched into the lid. She stopped a few feet from him. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above the wind. Ben nodded. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd be here. I wasn't sure you'd come." They stood in silence for a beat, then another. Charlotte held out the box. "I thought maybe I'd give this back, or rather, deliver it in person this time." Ben didn't reach for it. Instead, he looked at her. Really looked. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "I know. You already gave us more than we ever asked for. I didn't come to give you anything this time." Ben raised an eyebrow. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about Lily, about this place, about the way I felt when I was here. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was home." Her voice cracked then, soft and vulnerable. "I've had a lot of homes, Ben, but none of them ever made me want to stay." He looked down at the box, then back at her. "And now?" Charlotte took a trembling breath. "Now I want to stay, if you'll have me." Ben didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, gently took the box from her hands and set it on the porch rail. Then he cupped her face in his rough palms and looked into her eyes. "I've had a lot of days thinking about what I'd say if you ever came back." "And?" she whispered. He smiled, soft, warm, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes. "None of them were better than this." Then he kissed her. Not like the end of a story, but the beginning of one. Inside the cabin, Lily sat at the window with her sketchbook. When she saw the white SUV, she didn't run this time. She didn't even shout. She just smiled quietly. When the door opened and Charlotte stepped inside, snow still clinging to her boots, Lily ran into her arms and held her like someone who had known all along. "I missed you," Lily whispered into her shoulder. "I missed you too," Charlotte said, her voice thick with tears. Ben watched from the doorway, heart full. There in the center of the living room, beneath the hand-carved beams and the flickering hearth, the three of them stood, no longer strangers, no longer uncertain. A little family, knit together by kindness, forgiveness, and 1,000 imperfect choices that somehow led them to this moment. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ben and Charlotte sat on the porch, bundled in quilts, mugs of cider in their hands. Charlotte looked out at the moonlit trees. "Do you think it's too late to start over?" Ben shook his head. "No, I think sometimes it takes a lifetime to find the right beginning." She smiled. "So what do we do now?" We build something, he said, slowly, honestly. And if I mess up again, he reached for her hand. Then we fix it. Together. She rested her head on his shoulder, eyes drifting closed. And in the quiet of the snow-dusted evening, beneath a sky full of stars and a porch light that had never stopped burning, Charlotte Winslow finally came home. The first signs of spring arrived gently, like a whispered promise. Snow still lingered in the shadowed corners of the forest, but the sun had returned, stronger now, stretching longer across the sky. Buds peeked out from the bare branches, and the cabin no longer felt like a sanctuary against cold and grief, but something else entirely. A home. Charlotte had been back for nearly 3 months. She moved through the house now like she'd always belonged. Barefoot on creaky floorboards, flour on her hands as she baked cinnamon scones on Sunday mornings, a pencil tucked behind her ear as she sat beside Lily helping with spelling homework. She had given up her penthouse in Denver and the board seat at her father's firm. She traded all of it for simpler things, laughter, sawdust, quiet evenings on the porch. Ben, true to his word, let everything grow at its own pace. There had been no grand declarations, no rushed decisions, just mornings filled with shared coffee, evenings beside the fire, and a deepening trust that healed the old wounds in both of them. But some things, when nurtured with kindness and truth, don't need decades to take root. Sometimes just a single season of honest love is enough. They chose to marry in the clearing just beyond the back pasture, where wildflowers had begun to bloom between the lingering patches of snow. The same place Charlotte had fallen all those months ago, when her truth had come tumbling out with the brittle grace of spring ice breaking beneath new sun. Ben built the arbor himself. Simple pine beams, sanded smooth and tied together with twine and ribbon. Lily picked the flowers, daisies, wild violets, early crocus, and arranged them in bunches in mason jars. There were no fancy invitations, no aisle runners, no orchestra, just neighbors, folding chairs, and the kind of blue sky that only shows up for something sacred. Charlotte wore a dress of soft ivory linen, nothing extravagant, nothing borrowed. She tied her hair back and wore no veil. There was no need to hide anything anymore. Ben wore a navy shirt and his best boots, with Lily on one side and the mountains behind him. His hands were steady, his eyes bright. When Charlotte walked down the path, she didn't carry a bouquet. She carried Lily's hand. The moment their eyes met, time stilled. There were no doubts, no ghosts, no apologies left to make. Just them. A man and a woman who had found each other when neither was looking, and stayed because it turned out the broken parts of their stories fit together perfectly. The vows were simple. Ben spoke first. I never expected to fall in love again. But then you showed up, out of nowhere, and everything changed. Not because you saved me, not because you fixed something broken, but because you saw me and stayed. Charlotte's voice trembled as she answered. I used to think love was something you earned, something you had to be perfect to deserve. But you taught me that love is what's left when the lies fall away, when the truth stands bare, and you choose each other anyway. Lily, standing between them, beamed with all the joy her 9-year-old heart could hold. The officiant, a retired school teacher from the next county over, pronounced them husband and wife under a sky full of birdsong and promise. And as they kissed, slow and tender beneath the handmade arbor, the wind picked up, scattering petals across the field. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. Real. The celebration that followed was exactly what it needed to be. Food shared on picnic tables, laughter echoing across the trees, music played on an old guitar. No one wore tuxedos. No one checked the time. Neighbors danced barefoot. Children chased each other around the pasture. Charlotte sat with her arms wrapped around Lily as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting golden light over everything. Ben knelt beside them, pulled a small box from his pocket, and opened it. Inside was a hand-carved pendant, cedar, smooth and warm, with the word home etched into its surface. I thought it might be time, he said, fastening the string gently around Charlotte's neck. She leaned forward, touched her forehead to his. It already was. That night after the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered in the breeze, Ben and Charlotte stood on the porch, their fingers intertwined. Inside, Lily had fallen asleep with icing on her cheek and a sketchbook filled with doodles of hearts and stick figures. Ben pulled Charlotte closer. Do you ever think about how it all started? He asked. Charlotte smiled. You mean the part where I pretended to be a paralyzed runaway bride? He laughed, a deep, unrestrained sound that made her chest ache in the best way. That part, and everything after. Charlotte leaned into him. I think about it every day, and I wouldn't change a thing. Not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts. They stood like that for a long while, wrapped in each other, wrapped in the kind of peace that comes only after storms have passed. The wind rustled the trees, the stars shimmered above, and in the warm light spilling from their cabin windows, it was clear. Some stories don't need dramatic endings. They just need truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that chooses you again and again, even after all the masks have fallen away. Months later, Lily's teacher asked the class to write a sentence about what love means. Lily, without hesitation, wrote, "Love is when someone stays, even after they know the whole story." She turned it in with a drawing of 3 people holding hands beneath a wooden arbor under a sky full of stars. And in the corner, she wrote one more word: forever. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And more importantly, have you ever experienced a moment where kindness changed your life in an unexpected way? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories and reflections mean more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of hope, healing, and the quiet power of love, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.